you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Welcome to Visiting the Village. I'm Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and with me is the inflatable Ian Hardingham.
Hello, Mr. Paul Kilduff-Taylor. I don't have anything specific to say here, so hello.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
Valve have launched a bunch of Steam hardware this week. We've taken a look at Kotaku's piece on Alienware's Steam Machine and PC Gamer's piece on the Steam Link. We've also tried the Steam controller ourselves, so we may well talk about that. Ian Hardingham, how do you feel about these Steamy developments?
What a month for Valve.
Yes.
This stuff has all been in the works for so long and has been at various times like a big deal. When Steam machines were first announced, people got very excited about them, and there was quite a lot of excitement after that as well, and now they've all come out at once, which to be completely honest I wasn't expecting. This is like a really good kind of conglomerated action by Valve. We talked about it recently that they're going to have special sections in game stores, and that's pretty cool. And I have to say, I think that the response to all of these products has been pretty good.
Yeah.
And actually pretty pretty level-headed. I was kind of expecting to see a lot of bipolar stuff, either saying this is the best thing ever, Valve are the best thing ever, this is brilliant, go PC Gaming, or being like, this is the worst thing ever, I'm incredibly disappointed. And I've been really surprised because, we've got a Steam controller, and I've got a couple of issues with it, but I think it's going in the right direction. I'd really like it to have some higher production values for the next version. Like, I really like how shiny and solid my PS4 controller feels, and I'd definitely like to see that from the Valve controller. But the core stuff there is solid, and I think will get better and better, so that's really good. I guess the thing I'd heard least about was the Steam Link, which is a $50 piece of hardware which lets you stream a game from your computer in a different room to your TV in the living room, and of course you can plug Steam controllers into it, or wirelessly connect Steam controllers into it. And I'm hearing that this is just completely great, and this works perfectly, and you get very little lag, especially if you're using wired networking. And I'd like to give one a go.
Yeah, the Steam Link's very interesting. It wasn't sort of, again, immediately clear kind of what it was, but it is just, as you say, a $50 sort of Apple TV equivalent for using the Steam in-home streaming stuff. People are saying it works well on Wi-Fi, which I think is going to be the major issue for a lot of people. I tried Steam home streaming myself for the first time the other day, and I am lucky enough to be able to do it on a wired connection. And it was a little bit flaky getting it going. It crashed a couple of times, but once it was going, it was great. I played Prison Architect on my TV, which was fun. And I can actually imagine using this with a Steam controller to play some more elaborate things. Like, I'd like to try and play a more UI-heavy game on the TV in a sort of more relaxed way, and I think the Steam controller might let me do that. So it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I think the problem here, which is, interestingly enough, the problem with a lot of streaming solutions, but this sort of qualifies for the other stuff we're talking about here as well, is that you're always going to want to play a game in the best possible setting.
Yeah.
You always want to play it with the best possible control method, and not over a bad laggy connection, or connecting to a server that's in a distant town to get your games from. So the sort of, it's interesting to me that it sounds like the Steam Link is really good enough to just be fine for that. I can definitely imagine myself using that. The question I really have is, what is the take-up going to be of the Steam controller? And are we going to start seeing enough games like 100% designed around it? That's the problem when it's trying to emulate a mouse. because it's not a mouse and it's so different to a mouse. And while I'm really pleasantly surprised by how well it emulates a mouse, it's still going to be slightly substandard to a game that expects you to be using a mouse. So the thing that I'm really wanting to pay attention to is whether games put a lot of effort into getting like a primary control scheme on the Steam controller.
Yeah, I don't really think we're going to see that happen, because I think the Steam controller is designed to cover bases of things that other controllers leave out. And as such, it's not a super attractive thing, I think, to design for. Whether it will have the uptake, I just don't really see it, because it's not really better than anything else. It's sort of a good compromise solution, and those are not things that tend to massively take off in their own right. I think you have to do something very distinctive and definitively new, and I don't know, although the Steam controller is innovative, I don't know if it's inventing a new control paradigm, really.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's pretty much exactly how I feel about it. It's... the feeling of using the Steam controller, when the game is working for you and the right hand pad, which is like a trackpad, is working well for a particular game, like it's not too much of a Twitch game, but it is a game that requires the mouse, which I would guess that Prison Architect is somewhat like, although I guess maybe it gets twitchy at some point. That's when it can be really awesome and feel like there's a home for it as a real controller. I mean, for me, I guess what I want to see most is the Steam controller to be even better at being like a console controller, but with the PC related stuff. Because if it was as comfortable as a PS4 controller, as ergonomic as that, and it also had the cool right touchpad thing, that would be great for me, because I'd be able to use it for playing console style games in the living room, and then I wouldn't feel like I was losing too much if I wanted to try, this new Descent clone is the game that I want to try most at the moment, Prison Architect as well. I might be able to just switch over to using that. So I think that obviously it's not going to be possible for it to nail mouse emulation, but it's not impossible for it to nail PS4 joypad emulation.
Right, I mean, the PS4 pad for me and for you, I think, is the ultimate version of that type of controller. It just feels so good to use constantly, and it's surprising the way different games can use it. I'm very happy playing even FPSs with it, which I generally am not keen on consoles like you. So whether that can be attained, with the addition of this other thing, I mean, I guess that the main sad thing about the PS4 controller is that they don't allow developers to use the touchpad.
Yeah, that's really bizarre. I don't really understand why, because the touchpad is great on the PS4. But yeah, I'd like to see sort of a mashup between those two controllers, and that would be really cool.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. What do you make of the Steam machines? I'm still looking at these and sort of saying I don't really know, exactly where this is targeted. I think Kotaku agrees with me on that one.
Yeah, it's kind of an open and shut case for me. Basically, you can't really sell a Steam machine at a competitive price with the PS4 and the Xbox One for two reasons. The first is that because they make so many of those consoles and they have great deals with the manufacturers, they are always better able to give you a more powerful system for the same money. And moreover, because it's the same system for all the games can optimize much better. And also, which is a related but different point, PC games just tend to be optimized for a more powerful system than that, or not particularly well optimized. So the point is that at a competitive price point to the consoles, you are not going to get a competitive experience just because of the way things are.
Yeah.
Once you get much more expensive than that, people are starting to ask why it has to be a special kind of machine and why it isn't just a computer under your telly, which is basically where I think we're going to go with it.
Yeah, and that's really the key problem here. I mean, if you look at the Steam machine, I think, we're positive on a lot of things Valve have done. I feel like the thing that has not worked for me is SteamOS, basically because of this Linux issue. The fact that you have to run the Linux version of a game in order to use a Steam machine seems really odd to me when, as you say, it is effectively just a PC. You're buying a PC to run under your TV, sorry. You want it to just be a computer. I mean, that's what I have. I have a very cheap PC under my computer, and I think a lot of people do as well. So I'm just not really sure where you're kind of pushing people into this very weird ultra niche category.
Yeah, I think that when Steam first went after SteamOS and after Linux specifically, I think it was when Microsoft were terrifying everyone with the things they were saying about Windows 8 and about the future of Windows. And it was a pretty important, plausible exit strategy for Valve at the time, one that I was really on board with. I thought starting to make preparations for the world ending was a really appropriate thing to be doing at the time. And the world hasn't ended, and Valve have put a lot of time and money into getting a lot of games on Linux. Our games are on Linux, and work pretty well. And a lot of games do, and a lot of games don't. And Linux is the same as it's always been, which is that you can kind of have a good time with it as a consumer, but it generally doesn't function as well for doing like very mainstream activities, like a lot of games. So I'm completely on board with that. Are they going to pivot and make a Windows inverted commas version of SteamOS? I could see that happening, given that it really doesn't feel like the take-up of SteamOS is one of the important things that are happening around all of this.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. It was sort of a reaction to something at a time that kind of plays into all of this stuff. I mean, I guess the overall picture here is them just being speculative in 3 or 4 different areas at the same time, and then seeing where that's going to take them. And I'm happy with the way that they've done that. They've done everything in a very Valve style, in a non-kind of punitive style, and they've tried to work towards what their customers want and sound that out. So that generally is a good thing. We're not above criticizing Valve when they do things that we don't like. So actually, I feel encouraged by this.
Yeah, and I think really, I mean, just to go back to my very first point, it is still a bit surprising that after like all this time and all of these false starts and all of these news stories and all of the stuff that's happened with these 3 products, it's really surprising that they all came out at the same time and they're all pretty well done. Like, that's actually kind of a great result after really a long period of everything to do with all of this stuff being up in the air. And I guess it's amazing to see such an open process, because Valve were pretty open, more open than a lot of other companies would have been during this process. So we got to see some of the false starts and stuff going wrong. So I'm basically, odd to say, but I'm just impressed that it's kind of come out well altogether.
Yeah, I think I've seen most pushback on the Steam controller, actually, just sort of generally on Twitter. A lot of people who've bought it and are like just really confused by it, and that's fine. Like I agree with you. I think it could have gone to the place where everyone hated this stuff and they were like, Valve, well, you don't become a console platform holder, we want you to stay the same way, and nobody wants that. People are encouraging this, but I also feel like the Steam controller is something that could have gone better than it did as well.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the Oculus Rift DK1 in some ways, or maybe even the DK2. Like, it feels like a really good prototype. It is consumer ready to a certain extent, but I can understand, the build quality being a bit of a problem, and it's still early days. Like, games are still working out how to use the libraries. There's lots of different ways of setting up controls for your games, and it's going to take a lot of time for people to work out what works. And I think there might even be like a couple of manufacturing issues that affect some of the controllers and don't affect others, and that feeds into which control scheme you want to use. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be more interested in playing the second release of the Steam controller.
Sure. The developers of Skullgirls have been struggling with their Indiegogo campaign for their new title, Indivisible, according to Eurogamer. Their campaign has only raised $349,000 towards its $1.5 million goal in the first 2 weeks. They're citing the fact that people don't understand how much it costs to make a game as being one of the reasons for the failure. Is this just an example of the regular problems with crowdfunding, or is it something else entirely?
Well, I think this is an example of a regular problem, but I'm not sure it's to do with crowdfunding. This is actually a rant by the lead of the studio. There's no better way of putting it. It's just a rant, and I think the guy's pretty upset because he's budgeted out this game, and it's like Skullgirls apparently, which I haven't played. It's supposed to be like a Metroidvania / RPG thing with really, really pretty graphics, that kind of thing. They've budgeted it out at $3.5 million. They've got 505 to kick in $2 million, which actually slightly surprised me. But it was it required them to raise $1.5 million from Kickstarter. So if they're not going to raise this money from Kickstarter, it's like triply upsetting, because not only is that obviously a big disappointment, they're going to lose this investment, and they go from having the budget to employ a lot of people to make a really exciting game to having absolutely nothing in the space of a month. But having said that, I think he's just annoyed. I mean, he's upset, and he's flailing around, and he's blaming a lot of different things. And people do have some funny ideas about how much stuff costs. But yeah, you should talk about this, because it also gets towards something I want to talk about later, which is how crowdfunding is being used more now to prove that people are somewhat interested in the concept than to actually raise all of the money itself.
Right, so this is interesting. Skullgirls, if I haven't got this wrong, which there is always a chance of that, of course, is a one-on-one fighting game, and was one that kind of received a lot of difficult response from the fighting game community, with a lot of people really liking it, but the devs never really kind of getting it to that status that everyone wanted it to have. So it's kind of had this awkward relationship there. And this is a different type of game. It's a kind of side-scroller / RPG thing, from what I can gather, with the footage. So it would, if I've got this right, which I hope I have, it's out of the demographic for what they were trying to do originally. So that's one interesting factor here. I think also they haven't been around crowdfunding for a while, and I think they've come back to it now with some expectations that might be a bit crazy. I mean, a $1.5 million goal is extremely hard to hit now, especially for something that... This game looks interesting, and it definitely has innovative stuff, and the art is nice, but it doesn't seem like the kind of paradigm-changing, world-breaking, or super generic, super pandering thing that does well on crowdfunding. So it being a sort of special category where people don't really get why they need the money is not how I would explain it. I'm sure he's annoyed about comments that suggest that, and I'm sure that's provoked this response, but saying that's the reason here I find a bit difficult.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Raising $1.5 million on Kickstarter is just not something that happens with a solid AAA pitch like this. In order to hit 1.5 million, you have to have an old IP people are very excited about, or come up with a great new idea that just catches viral fire. Those are the two things that raise that level. And the kind of the sort of the high end for this kind of product, I think, is about $500,000, which is something they could have made. I'm still, we can talk about budgets and everything. He spent a lot of time talking about how $3.5 million for this kind of game isn't at all weird or badly designed, that this is just how much it costs to hire as many artists as you need for this kind of game. He's absolutely right, although I have to say, you and me were having a conversation about game budgets last Friday, and the idea of spending $3.5 million on a game right now is pretty terrifying to me.
Yeah.
So that's an important part of it. He also said, to get onto this other topic, and he was getting really ranty at this point and was making less and less sense. But he was talking about how a lot of people on Kickstarter are using Kickstarter as a way of proving interest. They've already got a lot of money from the publishers, and they just want to find out how much money they're likely to make by going through Kickstarter. And the game will be made whether the Kickstarter succeeds or not. And he was getting annoyed because he had the impression that maybe that was stopping him raising $1.5 million, which isn't even slightly plausible. But it is kind of interesting, and I think that's where Kickstarter is now. And it's something that I might use Kickstarter for. It's a way of finding out the long-term viability of a concept, much more than about getting the money to complete something.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, both the extremely high budget for this game, because it is extremely high. I mean, there's this mid-tier now of, I'm not going to say AAA, because I've got into trouble enough for saying AAA in the past, but there's a tier of game which has a sort of indie approach, but which has a very, very high art budget, and this is in that category. And for that category, 3.5 million, or however much it is kind of about right. But as you just said, I think it's kind of mad. Like, it's so dangerous to go in at that budget level when one of the alternatives is to start making the game at a reasonable budget, get it into beta, and then see where you can go with it. See whether it really will sustain that size of audience instead of punting everything up front like you would in an old school development model. So this is just a big sign that this kind of game, it's not perhaps been communicated well enough, and maybe they don't quite have the cachet with their community they thought they did. So it's a big warning sign. I think looking at it as a big warning sign rather than saying, oh, it's down to this thing the audience doesn't understand, is probably more healthy.
Absolutely. They need to say it's a massive warning sign. I think in the future we'll get some maths, and it might be from Steam Spy, which tells you, sort of based on how much money you get on Kickstarter, how much money you're likely to gross in the end. And I think that there's some maths to be done there. And the simple fact is, if they're halfway through their campaign, and this is actually on Indiegogo rather than Kickstarter, which is interesting as well. I mean, I think that it's harder raising the big amounts on Indiegogo for some reason, but I may be wrong about that. And they've raised $350,000, so maybe you could say that they would raise $700,000 in total. Maybe you can say that. I don't know if I think that's going to lead them to covering their development costs of $3.5 million plus how much they'd need to spend on marketing of a game of that size.
Yeah.
I think it's a massive warning sign. I think once he's calmed down and had some Alka-Seltzer, he needs to actually seriously consider not making it, which is a really, really terrifying thought, but that's kind of what the information is saying.
Well, maybe try and make it for, $200,000. Like, it's not impossible with that style of game.
Well, he's definitely saying that both Skullgirls, and to be clear, the way in which this game is like Skullgirls is only in the art style. And that's their brand, I think, from their point of view. He's just saying that that's how much it costs. I think his opinion would be that you absolutely couldn't make a game that looked as good as Skullgirls for like significantly less than this.
Right, but I mean that might be a good, a good time to change your art style. There's nothing kind of wrong with that. So they've done these funding drives with Skullgirls basically to add stuff to it. So at one point they did one that ended at $830,000 for 5 DLC characters. So It seems like they're very used to doing these sort of very specific things around Skullgirls and sort of expecting them to kind of print money, I guess. So not getting near this with a completely new game is probably quite shocking.
Right, so maybe this is part of the stuff that we were talking about when we first restarted the podcast about don't change the genre of your kind of core brand and expect to do as well. I suppose. I mean, this this really feels. I really feel for them. I'm sure they had just massive faith that they knew what their fans liked, and this is just really a massive sign that they didn't.
Richard Cobbett, Keith Stewart, Andy Kelly and Simon Parkin have got together over at The Guardian to produce a list of the worst games of all time. Among the treasures here are Knack, Limbo of the Lost, Plumbers Don't Wear Ties and Universal Studios Theme Park Adventure. Now, Ian Hardingham, I have an unusual question for you, which is when was the last time you played a genuinely bad game?
Ooh! I should have read the questions beforehand, so I have a good answer to that.
It's okay if you don't have a specific time.
Let's see. You may have to go first on this one while I think.
So I was trying to think about this, and it's very difficult to know. I mean, I played... There was one of those dinosaur games, which I think was called Primal Carnage or something, that someone gave me on Steam. And we played a bit of multiplayer, and my character got stuck inside a step. And I couldn't move. And that really made me feel like, oh, I'm actually playing a bad game again. It was sort of brought back a bit of trespasser, physics gone wrong. And you just don't see that very much. But now I think everything's so hyper-concentrated and filtered through all of these channels. Like, I kind of let people on Twitter go out and tell me if a game's bad, so I avoid them. Right? So I can't think of, like, a modern, recent game that was along the lines of Limbo of the Lost or Plumbers Don't Wear Ties.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I don't have enough time to play loads and loads of games, and I'm not enough of a fanboy of anything really to kind of buy something just like optimistically hoping all the stuff I've heard is wrong. So I have to say, boringly, I can't actually remember either, although maybe something will come to me at some point. This particular list of bad games is pretty good, but what they really could have done with is like having a category title for each game, like worst sports game or most underwhelming game or worst use of a license, because, you know, putting Rise of the Robots and Plumbers Don't Wear Ties next to Resident Evil 6 and Resistance 2 is just a bit weird. And actually, Resistance 2 especially, they start off the description of this one saying, despite being met with largely positive reviews. I think it's tough to put a game on the worst games of all time list that was met with largely positive reviews, to be completely honest. But that's neither here nor there. It's nice because it's a very varied list. Like, if you got someone to make a list of the worst games ever, it would always be like Custer's Revenge, Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, and they'd run out of stuff pretty soon. But there's quite a lot of interesting stuff on here.
I'd like to take issue with the choice of the Star Trek game from 2013, because the Star Trek Deep Space Nine game, Deep Space Nine Harbinger, which was, I'm sure we've talked about this on the podcast before, it was partially FMV, and then it was like Myst. It had these pre-rendered scenes that you had to click through, and all of them were very dark, so you couldn't necessarily see what you were clicking on, and you had to sort of find a tiny hotspot. That was, I think, I haven't played this Star Trek game, but it can't be worse than that. That's one of the worst games I've ever played, and I bought it in Woolworths for £50. Because games are always really expensive in Woolworths, because I liked Deep Space Nine, and I was 10 or something, and it was a tremendously traumatic experience for me as a player of games. So I think that needs to be rehabilitated in the bad games stakes.
Well, that's fair, yeah. Well, let's look at some of these others specifically. I think a game that we can all agree probably deserves to belong on this list is Limbo of the Lost, which is a game that was made using entirely from assets stolen from other people's games.
Yes.
A lot of them stolen from Oblivion and Unreal Tournament, and then stolen from some other mediums like movies, including, according to this article, Beetlejuice and Spawn, which was just great. And actually, this is one of the games I really wish I'd played. Perfect Dark Zero is on this list. And you see, this kind of does belong in some ways. And again, if it had been sort of subtitled Most Disappointing or, you know, Most Underwhelming Sequel, I think Perfect Dark Zero really is up there with Deus Ex 2 and a couple of other ones.
Aliens Colonial Marines. I mean, I know that's a bad game, but I'm sure I can think of 10 worse games from the mid-2000s than that, surely.
Yeah, these are kind of notably bad games rather than the worst games, which I'm fine with dealing with. And Resident Evil 6, again, is kind of an underwhelming sequel syndrome as opposed to being an absolutely terrible game. But on Keith Stewart's Twitter feed, he was saying that the response to this has been absolutely amazing.
Right.
And it was the second biggest read article on The Guardian the day it was released. And it kind of just tells you the slightly depressing fact that if you want to have something really popular on the internet, it needs to be half really interesting and half completely wrong so that people engage with it.
After last week's discussion of Blizzard's nerf to the Hearthstone card Warsong Commander, the developers responded to calls for them to justify the decision. PC Gamer have also published an article claiming that the Warsong Commander nerf is actually bad for Hearthstone overall. What do you make of Blizzard's thinking here?
Yeah, lots of interesting stuff here, and this is going to have to be a mini Magic Corner.
Okay,
I don't have anything for a big Magic Corner here, and visiting the Village Magic the Gathering correspondent Tom Richards did weigh in on this issue. So we'll first start talking about the article that was written by a high-level Hearthstone pro, who is very much pro Warsong Commander and the deck that it enables. And Tom's insight into this was that it sounded like a much more immature sort of pro landscape than Magic, which is to be expected. But he said that the guy was talking about how this deck kind of was good at getting rid of the noobs because it was sort of tricky to play against and kind of led to there being a certain kind of good competitive balance, which probably isn't very good. Wizards of the Coast definitely don't like it when there's a sort of a deck that's kind of really tricky to play against. Also, the suggestion that this deck stops the rest of the format becoming out of sync and out of balance may well be true, and that's just obviously going to require some significant rebalancing elsewhere, because this clearly wasn't a good deck to have. And finally, the points that I have written down about this. We talked last week about how they'd nerfed the wrong card, and while that has not been brought up here, specifically how they nerfed Warsong Commander, because they really basically destroyed it. They made it a completely different kind of card, really, and made one that was completely useless. And Tom wanted to know why they didn't just make it more expensive. Now, the designer has said that they tried 30 different tweaks, and that actually it's more about the fact that granting charge in Hearthstone. Charge is a thing that allows you to attack with a creature on the turn that it's summoned, when usually you have to wait till the next turn. Granting charge is just very, very powerful for some reason with Hearthstone, but not with Magic. So that was a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah. One thing that really interested me about the video that the designer made was the amount of time he emphasizes what is and isn't fun for new players. And that's really a big part of this Blizzard approach, and it's some of the elements of design that I think you generally dislike as a designer. So the main reason that they said that they went for this nerf was that it was difficult for people to anticipate the play that this patron deck can create, where you end up in a turn where you just spawn loads of these minions with charge. He was saying that it's bad for new players because they have to know that's coming and prepare for it. And I really feel in two minds about that. Like, it's really odd for me to hear a designer talking about that as a negative. Like, to me, that seems like a mid-level strategic play that you need to make. I guess he's saying that new people have to do that too much, but I would be really hesitant about a nerf that took away something like that.
I find that a little bit too specific to be able to properly respond to in a lot of ways, or possibly not specific enough. In terms of just, is it okay to need to prepare for something? I mean, that just depends a bit on what the game is like, I suppose. The number one stated goal by Wizards on this issue in general is that decks must be interactive, and whenever you get a kind of deck which is really kind of single player and not very interactive with your opponent, and that's the first thing they want to get rid of. So I could see a little bit how that might be somewhat similar to like having to prepare, I suppose. Actually, one of the most interesting parts of this that Tom was saying to me is that decks like the Warsong Commander deck, one of the reasons they wouldn't work in Magic is because Magic has what's called a sideboard, which I am 99% sure Hearthstone does not have. And I'm just going to have to go back and change this podcast if it does have it. But anyway, professional matches of Magic are 3 matches, and after your first, you can swap in and out any cards from your 15-card sideboard. So when you have a deck like this, you can just run 4 or 5 specific hate cards, and you can just then basically lose the first match because you didn't know you were going to play against this kind of deck, and then just easily win the second and the third. And in terms of a larger conversation, that's an interesting aspect that it would be interesting to see if Blizzard do introduce, because that's it enables you to do a lot more with your cards, and it allows you much more leeway with balancing, because very single track decks can get killed off the sideboard.
Yeah, I don't know about changing your deck. I don't actually know the structure of pro Hearthstone. I've not watched any competitive Hearthstone. I don't think that you can change your deck between games, which is effectively what the sideboard is. I don't think
that's right.
Yeah. So, I guess at a pro level that would very much work. If you have your anti-patron deck, and then you can bring that out in the middle of the match, that could be quite exciting. I think that it was really interesting to see this discussion. Again, the focus of the designers is very much not the same as the focus of the community, and that's going to be true of all competitive games. You see it in Smash a lot. They make a lot of changes for new players that affect the competitive game in an annoying way, and I think that's fine. But also, it really, for me, shows up some of the problems with Hearthstone in general, in that it is a game where if you don't understand these specific combinations of things that can come out very suddenly, then you just lose. And that's not something that one nerf is going to change. This is a particularly egregious example of that. But it just sort of speaks to me about how the mid-level metagame of Hearthstone is kind of fundamentally uninteresting, at least to me. And I don't know if they'll ever be able to change the game in a way that will improve that generally for new players who are of my personality. Maybe they are not interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the need to have such a high level of knowledge to feel like you're playing the game properly,
yes,
is one of the biggest turn-offs for all of these kind of games. I was also talking to Tom about what are generally called LCGs now, of which I think Netrunner is one.
Right.
Card games that have all the cards in the initial box, or you can buy expansions, but it's not a booster pack based game, and that allows you to have much more control and knowledge over how you can play the game. And I think old me from like till sort of 5+ years ago would have felt that was much more ethical way of making games and a much more tidy way of making games. But I've really kind of got into just how massive and flabby and weird these CCGs are, how exciting it is to go and buy a booster pack and get a bunch of cards you never heard of. And really, I think it's kind of sort of the internet and the Pro Tour that's kind of ruined the real magic of that. Like when you had no idea what was going on, when you had no idea what all these cards were, and you were playing kitchen table Magic with people, and you got a booster and it had something really interesting in it, that was so cool. And it reminds me, like when I first started watching American football, when I first would watch a team that I'd never seen before, it was so exotic. And it's just kind of sometimes not knowing anything is really exciting, and we're getting fewer and fewer situations like that. And I think it does kind of hurt these games.
That is completely true. One of the things that happened to me, I wanted to go back and play Hearthstone just because I found it sort of fun and relaxing to play. And I kind of wanted to take that approach of just like, well, I'll just make a deck that I like, and I'll just, when I get a new card, it'll be exciting. And you can play like that for basically all of half an hour before you start getting annoyed with the very targeted, strategic way that people beat you all the time. Like, it's just not possible to play these games like this. I think Blizzard have some idea that people do, and they presumably have the analysis and the metrics to back that up. Like, maybe the tier of people who play like this is actually just really big in all of these games. They're really, really casual players, and that's okay. But I find that very difficult to believe. Like, I think most people who are even slightly interested in the game will go on the internet like an hour or two after their first week of games. And I would assume there are a lot of those people.
Yeah, again, it's just like this. It all contributes to this mild disquiet I have about these big competitive systems being so finely designed, and you're going through this kind of very well designed process by which it's addictive at the very beginning, and then they kind of make it worse. So you kind of want to put in more money, and you have to go through this stuff, and you have to basically, you can't just be like good at tennis and just like turn up and it turns out that you've got something really good, or you happen to have like long legs or something. It's like everyone has to go through this process, and they all have to spend a similar amount of time playing it. And sure, talent's important, I'm not saying it's not, but it's like it just feels really linear.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think one of the interesting games, and a lot of people wouldn't say this, one game where I found this to be okay was CS. Like, if you play CS online, there are so many ludicrously bad people, so many of them, that you can have a pretty good time, even if you don't really know what the map is, even if you're not really sure what the guns are, or like, I mean, I haven't played CSGO, and this might be why. Like, this was when I was training for our LAN party, I played a lot of CS 1.6. It's just like, that was okay for some reason. Why is that the game that was okay?
Well, I think that there are two reasons. I mean, at first, I think that a game like CS, where you don't have any kind of received stats or received money or received like upgrades, that helps. But also, whenever you get like a bigger team game, there are often sort of weird holes that you can fill.
Yeah.
Like if no one wants to be the medic, you can be the medic and get some excitement from that. Like that's a lot different to a one-on-one game, I think. It's got a lot more ability to avoid some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose also Heroes of the Storm is a pretty fun game to piss around in as a competitive multiplayer game. And actually that's one where if you don't play badly, people will like you, and it's okay. And not playing badly with some of the characters is actually spectacularly simple. So I do think people are now trying to design in, I mean, it's a shame that that's a MOBA, obviously. They're trying to design in these paths for the casual player that are actually enjoyable and contribute to everyone else's experience well.
Yeah, but even then, all of those games feel a lot less experientially designed, like in the long term, than something like Hearthstone. It feels like they're kind of just letting you play and get better, rather than having this deck and upgrade system which kind of pushes you down a much narrower corridor.
Sure. Payday 2 developers Overkill have begun the process of adding TF2-style microtransactions to their game, despite explicitly saying that they would never do so. Fans are not happy, especially Redditors, who suggested changing the name of the Payday 2 subreddit to Pay Today. Could Overkill have handled this any worse?
That's some great humour there from Reddit. Very much appreciate that.
I like that.
Well, I mean, it could always be worse. It could have been sexist, but they couldn't. I think I'll put it this way: it couldn't have turned out much worse.
No.
I'm kind of going to take a bit of a contrarian position here. So people are extremely angry at Overkill, and we're getting to kind of spamming Amazon.com reviews level of anger over this.
Bad level.
And 50% of the people who say they're angry because 2 years ago Overkill said they'd never add microtransactions. And it's like, I just don't have much time for that. Hating something because 2 years ago a game designer who's no longer at the company said, explicitly said there will not be microtransactions. That's not the world we live in. People change their mind about microtransactions all of the time. This is so weird. Like, it's not even very... do you have to pay £1.60 to open every chest? I think that's right. Okay. Sorry to pivot to immediately asking you a weird question about this.
Yes, you do.
Okay, so you have to pay £1.60 to have the chance of opening something interesting. That's pretty bad. I mean, I think they could have made it slightly better by... The weapons have... Basically, you're opening weapon skins. Excuse me, I've got so excited I'm talking complete nonsense. The stuff that you pay money to open these chests, the stuff that contains is generally weapon skins, which is very much like CSGO. But these actually add extremely small advantages. Now, there are two weird sides to this. The first is, this is a co-op game. This is a player versus enemy game. So I think Overkill probably suspected that it didn't matter if you added some kind of non-aesthetic microtransactions, if everyone's on the same team anyway. And they're also really like tiny bonuses. But yeah, why did they do that? Like, if you've got a model that you're copying, why don't you just copy it and not like add this thing that could be a massive problem?
Yeah, so yes, I think I'm not sure on this drill thing either now that I've looked into it. I think it may be that you pay £1.60 and you can open all the random safes. So this is really interesting to me because, like you say, exactly like you say, if they're copying TF2, why didn't they do what TF2 did, which is that you start introducing stuff slowly and then you see how the community reacts and then you build on that. And it seems like they're sort of trying to do it by dropping the base price, which is what TF2 did. But what TF2 absolutely did not do was come straight in with these gameplay changing things. You have to get people used to this idea and you have to do it in conjunction with them. You have to make stuff that they like. Another factor here is, of course, this outrage is going to be the vocal minority of players. Payday 2 has a massive fan base, and I'm sure quite a lot of them just simply do not care or haven't noticed about this. So it's very difficult, but TF2 did manage to do it without this level of anger, back when it was even worse to do something like this. Having said this stuff about, them going back on their word and so on, you're right. The lead designer, David Goldfarb, who originally said, no, God, I hope not, never no, about microtransactions, has gone, so he hasn't done anything wrong. It's just very difficult, but I guess I understand fan outrage here.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out if there's some aspect to this being a co-op game which makes people more angry about it. It seems weird. I mean, I know a couple of Payday fans, and they just love relaxing and going on with friends and playing this thing. And there's a possibility that maybe that's more threatened somehow by microtransactions than going online to play some PvP. I don't know, but I could kind of vaguely see that. I think they've handled it badly, but I also think that the reaction has been pretty crazy off the charts as well. Because it could be a lot worse. I mean, I think that you couldn't be more right. They just need to have done it slower. And I think that there might be, and this is complete projection, but I think there might be a case of where they said, well, it's going to cost us a lot of money to do this. We want to basically make sure we recoup our money early on.
Yeah.
We kind of do. I think maybe they see it as a bit of fan service in some ways because they are putting in something that is so successful in those other two games, in CSGO and TF2. They're kind of saying, well, this is actually like almost like Payday 2.5 or could lead to that.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that we pay our coders and our artists for their time. But that's kind of really dumb.
It's so difficult to get this right. I mean, the EVE Online monocle is something you could bring up here, where that symbolised the way.
I'm always happy when anyone brings that monocle up. In fact, I want to get one in real life.
I know. I've got to bring up the EVE Online monocle. I've got to go there because it's just symbolic of how this goes wrong. Like, you're not going to make everyone happy, and you're certainly going to annoy a load of your players by doing this. And sometimes it's the right thing to do for your game. I mean, when you've had a game that's this popular for this long, I didn't realise it was entirely co-op. I don't know if there's any PvP at all. Maybe there is. I don't know. I haven't played Payday. Maybe I should. So
I actually think it's like Left 4 Dead in that it's purely player versus enemy. But again, I could always be wrong.
I kind of want to try Payday now. I've been meaning to try it for a long time. I think I'm going to try it on the PS4. So actually, they've made a new fan from doing this, which I think is quite amazing. Anyway.
Good.
Polygon have some details of the new Nintendo NX system. Not many details, though. It's rumoured to be a console/handheld hybrid. Can Nintendo bounce back from the Wii U?
Oh dear. I was feeling tired before we started this topic, and now I feel very tired.
Yeah.
Because trying to work out what's going on with Nintendo's new console, when the only piece of vaguely solid information we have is that it's a console handheld hybrid, is going to be extremely hard. They say it's a new console with a new concept, which sounds like a very kind of arty-farty marketing message. But if it's a console handheld hybrid, I kind of view that that's not a new concept. That's what the Wii U is. And if it's a handheld that you can take on the road, then I'm just kind of boggled by... I'm afraid I'm going to focus entirely on that aspect of this. Because what I really think... I'm sorry to say this, what I really think Nintendo should do now is focus on handheld stuff. Because, actually, there are a bunch of Nintendo games recently that if they were on a handheld, I would have played. And I think they're having difficulty competing with the other consoles, basically. And I'm not one of those people who thinks Nintendo should make PC games. I'm very happy for Nintendo to make games on Nintendo's consoles. I think there are some reasons why that produces the best results. But for me, it would be much better if it was a handheld. But what is this? I'm just trying to imagine a handheld console hybrid, which isn't a terrible idea.
Yeah, if this is true, and at this point in the kind of console rumour mill, the thing that people say it is often not true. If this is true,
that's true.
It implies that they think that the Wii U didn't work because they didn't do it properly, didn't execute the idea well enough, and it's such a good idea they want to come back around and have another go. And that's really concerning if that's true, because I think the problem with the Wii U is just the idea of the Wii U. It's not a good idea. It doesn't work. You can't make a console handheld hybrid that is either a good handheld or a good console. You just can't. I can't imagine what that would be. So for them to be doing this is really just absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I understand there are lots of Wii U fans, and I don't think either of us are saying that the Wii U doesn't have a lot of benefits, a lot of pluses, and there aren't some really good games on it. They've made some really good games on it, and, especially Super Mario Maker, the tablet thing makes complete sense with that.
Yep.
But I still basically am completely on board with the idea that this just isn't a particularly good idea, and I hope that they aren't doing something like this, because I'd like to see a more kind of mature version of the 3DS in some way.
Yeah.
And maybe if there was some weird base station with that, then okay. But, like, they really have got to work out now whether they're making stuff that could be seen as a kind of toy, like Wii Sports.
Yeah.
Or if they're kind of making proper console stuff. And I really hope they're not going to try and compete with PS4 and Xbox One, because that's boring, and PS4 and Xbox One are really good. And I want to see them do something different, but I don't want it to be the Wii U.
Can they go back to the thing where they would find this middle tier, middle maturity technology that no one had really used yet and based a console around that? Because that was Wii, and it was Game Boy, and it was also Virtual Boy. But it was, that used to be their thing. And I felt like Wii U was a big departure from that, because it was like, well, tablets exist already that are better than this. So...
Yeah, but the problem with that is that everyone's moving on to everything not being about hardware anymore.
Yeah.
I think that's really the issue. And I think, my biggest issue, as you say, with the Wii U was probably the fact that I have an iPad. And, like, picking up this horrible plastic thing, when I could have been using an iPad, it was really, really, really wrong to me. And I'm sure that'll make some people annoyed, that sentiment. And of course it's nice for kids. I'm sure my daughter would like the Wii U tablet more than the iPad. But I felt really strongly about that. So it's not really about the hardware anymore. And if you're going to make it about the hardware, certainly for, like, people of my age, it better be nice hardware. I mean, it better be like Sony, Apple level hardware, which seems unlikely from Nintendo. We bring it back.
Yeah.
Get the N64 controller and turn that into something cool. Do something.
I think I'd like to see them go the weird route. That's what they're good at, and that's the thing that will just come out of left field and surprise everyone. Maybe a better Wii with a much better motion controller would actually be better than trying to iterate on the Wii U. But who knows if that's what they're doing. I mean, should they even do another handheld at this point? Like a pure handheld? Like, it's so hard. I don't know what I think they should do.
Well, they're doing okay with the 3DS. I think it would be fine for them to try. I mean, like, we're always talking about the Vita. I mean, I don't think that their next handheld will hit the spot the Vita does for me, but it's always a possibility. I always like seeing new handheld stuff, but I don't want it to be tied to a console or compromised by a sort of standalone console in any way. I think the tragedy of the Wii U is that it was very weird.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't sort of excitingly weird.
Fair enough.
So let's just cross our fingers for Nintendo.
Game Informer published a list of 5 popular PC games now available for consoles, including Grow Home, Divinity, and Goat Simulator. Are the lines between PC and console meaningful at this point?
Well, this is exactly the question that I wanted to discuss when I brought up this topic today, because basically console games and PC games are close and they're different, and I'm trying to work out how I feel about that.
Right.
So let's have a look at the games listed here from a jumping off perspective. So we have Goat Simulator, Grow Home, The Talos Principle, Wasteland 2, and Divinity Original Sin, which I've heard a lot about, but I don't actually know very much about. Apparently it's turn-based, which is cool. Anyway, so these are all quite different games. I mean, you can't get much different from Goat Simulator and anything else. Talos Principle, I think, is quite a lot like Portal. Anyway. So, these games. Wasteland 2 is a really good example of the kind of game that wouldn't have come out on the consoles previously. And now they are, and that's cool. And yeah, I'm wondering what sort of business decisions go into deciding which of the two platforms to make a game for predominantly. I mean, if you're making a racing game, you should probably make it for the consoles, probably. And I guess if you're making a big RPG, you should probably still make that predominantly for the PC. Is that ever going to change?
I don't think so. I mean, a lot of it is about the setting of how you play, and a lot of it is about the control method. So there are games you want to be very absorbed in, you want to have loads and loads of control, and that suits a mouse. But it is interesting to see these more crossover-y things like Wasteland, which would kind of be traditionally, I guess, more of a PC thing. I mean, this list of games on consoles are sort of all things that really make sense on consoles. I mean, Grow Home is basically a console game. It's very controller centric. I can't even imagine what that's like to play with a keyboard and mouse. Similarly, Goat Simulator is basically, I mean, it has a sort of PC ethos in its development. And I'm sure it was a heroic effort by Double 11 to get that onto consoles, but ultimately the way it controls and the sort of feel that it has are that of a console game. So I find that, like, you know, the question for me really is, should Prison Architect be on consoles? Like, should something that is an overwhelming hit on the PC that really does not suit a console interface, should that have a native console version?
Well, I don't know. I haven't played Prison Architect enough to tell. I mean, Terraria on the Vita is still like the best example of a thoroughly PC game that they managed to make work on a console.
Yeah.
So, like, how would that compare to Prison Architect experience?
Well, the thing is that Terraria's main gameplay looks like a console game. And I actually think that really matters, even if the game has nothing to do with that kind of gameplay-wise. Whether it feels like it suits the platform is actually a really good indicator of whether or not it suits the platform.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
So I do feel like there is this meaningful line. It's still in terms of the deeper strategy things. I mean, we were talking about that earlier with Steam Controller. Like, I don't really see Paradox games in general on consoles being a great idea. I know Blood Bowl 2 launched simultaneously on consoles, so that's kind of an interesting choice. Yeah, I still really feel like there's going to be this big market of people who really want something that's way more detailed and about fine tweaking than a console can offer, really.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, that probably is the genre. You know, Paradox style games like Crusader Kings 2 are probably, like, yeah, the most PC side, the kind of the ones that you most sort of worry about putting on the consoles. And I guess the most console side genre, yeah, would it be driving possibly? Platformers are a weird one because you kind of think that would be console, but plenty of people try and make platformers for the PC. Yeah, and I mean, properly crossover genres now, I'd say like the Elder Scrolls and the Witcher series are probably the most crossed over in my way, in that people are really totally happy to play them on both. Metal Gear Solid is the only game that's even remotely like an FPS that I was happy to try playing on the console.
Sure.
FPS is... Yeah, the console FPS is obviously now a big thing, and they know how to make it work better. But I'd still rather play that on the PC. So, you know, it just... Talking about it just makes me feel like I want to play these games on the original system that they were made for, because that's where the experience is going to be best. And as we were talking about it before, it's like, we're connoisseurs, man. Like, I have walnuts with my cheese. Like, you know, I want to have the best possible experience.
I mentioned this last week, but it's relevant here. One thing I've always felt with console games is that they could replicate the gameplay of a more in-depth PC title, but they just needed to do it with a good UI. And that's what Destiny does with all the equipment and slots and things and upgrades and stuff. Is that it really replicates that feeling of an MMO, but in an extremely console-friendly, readable, clear UI that works well with a controller. And to do that, they had to adopt this cursor thing that you can do in the menus, which is really cool. So I'd really like to see that. It's the main reason that I stopped playing The Witcher, is that the UI is so horrible on a console and you're squinting like to see whether something is a green rune or not, and that's just not fun or enjoyable in any way. So I do think people should think more about about presentation and UI versus gameplay. I think there could be an interesting sort of breed of console-oriented stuff that has the PC depth to it if people just think a bit laterally.
Yeah, there's a much higher bar on the consoles, and I think it's because just the whole of Windows and the mouse and the keyboard are basically kind of designed to make more user interfaces better just by default. Whereas you're going to much more quickly notice a bad interface on a controller. You know, it's a smaller language, a smaller set of buttons and controls that you have, and not only that, it's kind of a less natural set for any kind of user interface. It's possibly more natural for a lot of things, like driving a car or a plane. But, you know, a lot of interface stuff is about using a cursor or about needing to get to various different windows. And obviously, that's already just going to be inherently better with a mouse. Even if it's not a particularly well-designed UI in the first place, it's just not going to be anywhere near as bad. The worst feeling interfaces are usually on the console. So I agree with that. It's good when people put enough effort in to make that work. And, as we know from having looked at doing FS on consoles and on tablets, it's actually probably harder than you think to start with to do.
Yeah. We have a final topic here, which is just labelled Boner Man in the show notes. And it's about a Kotaku piece entitled The Australian Who Makes Terrible Games on Purpose. Now, this sort of largely emerged as a Twitter phenomenon, a guy who goes by the name of BonerMan_Inc. And he's been taking suggestions from various people for bad game ideas, including one where you have to walk from your house to the bar. There's one that I saw that I really like, which I think is called Adult Simulator. And it just has a hand trying to choose between paying a bill or buying some stupid shit. And it's just very blurry pixel art. So, Boner Man, please give me your thoughts.
This is really fun. I like this a lot. The guy takes single line bad game ideas on Twitter and makes them into like really nice looking kind of somewhat Spectrum-y, somewhat Game & Watchy games. And my first thought when I saw this was that this guy's probably a really good game designer, because he manages to like really drill down with these ideas into a concept which is like both sort of funny and like representative of the original idea, but also like somewhat good to play. Like it's like one of those arcade games a lot. I really felt like sending him the idea that we had for a terrible game, Pheasant Horn 3.
Yes.
Which was a game idea where you were in a car and you had to stop because there was a pheasant in front of you. And you just had to wait for him to get out of the way. And you could beep your horn, but beeping your horn had no impact on the pheasant at all. But it was the only interaction that you could do, which I thought was a great idea and sort of fits in perfectly with this guy's ideas. And he's called Boner Man, and he likes being referred to as Boner Man. And his graphics are really cool. So I'm like fully on board with this guy.
I'm definitely endorse Boner Man. I like the try to keep the cat from running out the front door when you're leaving late to work game, where he's represented that as just loads of the same cat model that are trying to get out of the door and you have to run around, pick them up, sort of Burger Time style. He has another one where, quote, you have to stake people out in a bog so the Romans don't invade. And he's just got a guy with a massive beard just plonking stakes into tiny Romans. Boner Man. Now, that's enough Boner Man, and we don't have an Ian's Magic Corner this week, or rather it was rolled into a previous topic, but instead we do have Paul's Smash Corner, and I'm going to talk this week about a very huge development in high-level competitive Smash 4, and that was Nairo beating the incumbent champion Zero at MLG. Now, Zero has been absolutely dominating the game. It's very rare in one of these scenes that you get an individual who's had quite the amazing run that Zero's had. I believe it's 54 tournaments, an unbroken 54 tournament win streak, which is truly incredible. And Nairo comes second to him a lot, but at MLG he finally managed to overcome him. It's some interesting stuff to talk about here. Nairo plays Zero Suit Samus, who is my character, and Zero plays Sheik. And as I've said before, Sheik is sort of overwhelmingly considered to be the best character. Zero Suit Samus is said to be sort of in the top 4. So there was a question as to whether Nairo could ever beat him. It's quite a difficult matchup. They're both very fast characters. So a lot of it comes down to reading your opponent, as you would expect at that level. Zero and Nairo also play together quite a lot. There's quite a few videos of them sort of on streams and stuff playing together. They seem to get on very well. So it's kind of very good-natured rivalry. But I watched a bit of this. I watched the final game, and it was really interesting to see a couple of things. So with Zero Suit Samus, it's quite hard to approach, and one of the difficult things about playing her is landing her grabs, because she has very slow grabs. And in this match, Nairo was able to get a lot more successful grabs and time when Zero was going to be open to that much better. So whether or not that was Zero playing worse or Nairo just figuring him out a bit more, that was interesting to see. But it really shows you how pivotal those are in Zero Suit Samus's game. Also, the final stock of the final match was truly beautiful. Nairo managed to come in from off the stage and dodge behind Zero, anticipating his move, and then hit him with a back air, getting him off the stage himself. He then looped around him using the down B flip kick, which is extremely unusual use of that move. It basically required him to anticipate the fact that Zero was going to go down underneath the stage and come up for his recovery, which I haven't watched enough of his play to know if that's a characteristic thing he does, but it's not necessarily what you'd normally do when being hit at that distance. So he made this amazing read and then did this absolutely beautiful move to come in over the top of him with the flip kick and get the kill. So fantastic for fans of Zero Suit Samus and Nairo. Nairo is an incredibly nice guy. He will talk to you on Twitter if you talk to him. And it's really great to see the top of the scene having these two very open, very interesting personalities dominating it. So the question is now, will he be able to repeat? Will he be able to assert himself as the king of Smash? I think that's kind of doubtful, but interesting to see nonetheless.
That's great. Wow. Well, good long monologue from you on that. And also, yeah, I mean, I just think it's great that we're at this point in pro sports where they're really watchable. I'm weird, so I still really desperately want there to be a channel on my TV that just shows all of the good ones all of the time.
Yep.
I don't have to use the computer, and I don't have to worry about how long a break they have between things. That's kind of what I really want personally, but it's kind of getting there. And like, you know, when I'm next kind of just completely exhausted, and instead of having to watch some European soccer match, if I can turn on some crazy CS match and it's just as easy as that, I'll be really excited by that. So, and it's cool that Smash is a big deal as well. Like I kind of find Smash a lot more interesting, like a lot more interesting than Street Fighter and any other fighting game. Like, it's got a lot more movement to it. And it's much more up my alley, and I'm really glad that it's not just first-person shooters, MOBAs, and StarCraft 2 that are the only things you can watch. So that's cool.
Smash is an interesting one because it's very hard to read visually if you don't play it a fair amount. I mean, one of the reasons I like watching Nairo is that I understand what he's doing, simply because he plays my character, and I don't understand what many of the other pros who play other characters are doing. So watching someone where you know what they're doing and you're just continually blown away, his basic movement is absolutely brilliant and looks different to any other player and is very hard to do. But when he pulls out these flourishes, you know, getting to the point where you can actually understand why that's good, I think is interesting. And yeah, generally esports do suffer from a curation problem. I didn't know that MLG was that weekend, and so I missed it. You know, my favourite player playing one of my favourite games, I missed it completely, and I've only just caught up with it. So a channel would be good, a general esports thing, which can bring these games to people and also explain them in a way which is non-patronising. There are some very good Smash commentators, but there's some very bad ones as well who just talk in the gobbledygook language of Smash no one can understand. So it's a problem. I would love more people to be able to experience it in the same way, but as usual, I think unless you play those games quite a lot, you can't. Now it's time to talk about games that were released this week in 2005, thanks to Eurogamer.
Actually, can I stop you there, please?
You can.
I obviously did not get to you soon enough on the show notes, but I have an announcement.
Oh, yes.
This is not the best place in the podcast to have an announcement, but I'm going to make it here. Next Friday, which is Friday the 30th of October, we, and more specifically I, am doing something interesting in Nottingham for Nottingham Game City.
Yes.
They have a five-a-side soccer pitch set up in the town square, and on every day of Game City, a different designer has created a version or a mod of football that will be played by a group of people at 3 p.m. in the afternoon and televised, no less, to screens surrounding the pitch and the internet anyway. And I am one of the designers who's doing this. So on the Friday at 3 p.m, there will be a live played version of Frozen Football, my turn-based take on soccer. And I have just, while recording this podcast, received the feedback from Nottingham Game City's testing event, and it's very positive, a few tweaks that I might put in. So I'm actually really excited about that. And if you are someone who listens to this podcast and does not know me in real life, then I'm pretty sure I'll be drinking beer there and willing to talk to you. So that would be really cool if you want to come along to Nottingham and see something quite strange going on.
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to that. That's going to be very exciting. I also am on a panel about Britsoft, which I believe is on the 31st, so I'll be talking there as well. And if you haven't been to Game City before and you're anywhere near Nottingham in the next couple of weeks, definitely come down for a day, or up for a day if you're from the south, and just hang out, because there's a lot of good things that happen. It's very interesting. It focuses more on the cultural side of games, I guess, but a lot of it is about having fun and playing games and doing silly things and drinking beer. So yes, I'm very excited to see Frozen Football in action, and the design for it was particularly exciting. So it'll be good. We do like Game City and the National Video Games Arcade as well. So there we go. Right, now then, before I was interrupted, but for a valid reason, I will say, we return to the games that were released this week in 2005, beginning with Pokemon Emerald on the Game Boy Advance. Now, I'm actually going to stop at this one briefly, because Pokemon Emerald, didn't they normally release Pokemons in, batches of 2? And do you know anything about Pokemon Emerald?
Well, I mean, they do, which makes me believe that Emerald is one of the sort of slightly special versions.
Okay.
Yes, it's a sister game to Ruby and Sapphire. It is the 5th and final Generation 3 core series game.
Okay.
Pokemon has some pretty epic weird stuff going on in its past. I can't. I think it's one of the mid games they released. Like, it's they had a thing of making like another game in the series and sort of like the S versions of the iPhones, that kind of thing.
Pokemon Sapphire S. Also, we got Pro Evo Soccer 5 on the Xbox and PS2. I think we all know about that. Quake 4 on the PC. Now, yes.
Quake 4's not very good. I'm sorry. I got it recently because I was like, I say recently, I mean 5 years ago, but that's recent in my mind.
Yeah.
Because I played Prey, and I think both you and I are big Prey fans.
Do you like Prey? Yep.
Prey is really one of the most sort of nice surprises when it comes to games I've ever had. And that kind of made me think that Quake 4 would be good for some reason. And sorry, but Quake 4 isn't very good.
Yeah, no, I remember people didn't like it at the time, and it looks funny. Of the older Quakes, I mean, I guess, is Quake 2 worth playing? I tried a bit, and I didn't really get on with it that well.
I played Quake 2 single player a lot.
Yeah.
But I really think that Quake 1 and Quake 3 are probably like the definitive ones. Quake 1 is still by far my favourite. I absolutely love
yeah. Quake 1's amazing. I absolutely do recommend, if you haven't played Quake 1, play it, because it's totally different from any other FPS since. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Shattered Union on the PC and Xbox. Don't know much about that. Yeah, okay. SSX On Tour on the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube when they were still making SSX games. Tecmo Classic Arcade. We should have a special sound effect that plays every week when there's an arcade collection.
Every single week we have some ludicrous arcade collection. I really, like, if you'd asked me this before we started doing this segment, I would have thought that this whole thing started later than 2005. Like, this is earlier than I thought.
It just never ends. It's like the line noise of game publishing is these constant arcade collections. The Warriors on Xbox and PlayStation 2, that was a Rockstar game, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right.
The X Factor Sing on PlayStation 2 and PC. UFO Aftershock on PC. Now, this was bad, I believe.
Well, no, we can talk about this, because there is actually interesting stuff here. So, the UFO trilogy, I like Aftermath, Aftershock, and After
Shave
something. They're all like pretty decent AA sort of clones and sort of follow-ups to the original UFO Enemy Unknown, and I played one quite a lot. Robin played them a lot.
Right.
And it's funny, because it's one of those things where I feel like if this exact game, like literally the exact first game they made of this and released in 2004, had been kickstarted in 2013, it would have made like $1 million.
Yeah.
Or released on Steam in 2014, it would have made $1 million, which is so weird. Because it's pretty good. It's definitely a lot better than quite a lot of sort of high concept, not very well executed Steam games at the moment. So I just find that really weird to think about.
So Wikipedia says that Aftershock uses a real-time system with adjustable speed along with a pause option, and that is a thing. I feel like there's some innovation to be done with that stuff in strategy games, because I think when people have tried to do it recently, they've sort of copied the old style of doing it. Multi-level battlefields, something people always want, accessible buildings, but lacks some previous features such as destructible terrain. Yeah, I guess they did a lot of kind of like weird development in these games that's been a bit forgotten about because people kind of lump them in, and as did I, with the sort of not very good XCOM sort of mid-tier games.
Yeah, and one of these was set on Mars. The bases are quite good, I think.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Xenonauts, which is by a good friend of ours, Chris England, and is very successful. I think it's probably a better game and a more authentic game, definitely. But it's like there's plenty to these things. So
also, the aliens are called the Reticulans, which is the worst alien name ever. And finally, WRC Rally Evolution on the PlayStation 2. An interesting week, I feel, that week. That's enough of that, and now we catapult ourselves into the present with the top 10 UK Steam games. Now, let me tell you, Ian Hardingham, this is a pretty interesting week in the top 10 UK Steam
no
games.
Ark!
Well, no Ark for one thing. That's not the only reason. So let's start at number 10 with Planet Base. Now, this is a slightly Space Engineers-y building things on planets game that has been doing the round on Twitter. It's very buggy, it's very early, but it's just going to show that these stupid building games where you build things together on planets will not go away. Number 9 is Payday 2.
Now, yeah, just to focus on Planet Base. It's sort of we can't really have this full conversation because Maya is made by a colleague and friend of mine, and isn't doing as well as Planet Base. But actually, it feels to me like this is the first time I've seen something where people are really more interested in the broken very early thing than games that are starting to get nearer to release and starting to be better defined as to what they actually are. And I think there's kind of an interesting thing to explore there. Like, again, this specific genre, this kind of very simulation-y sort of bits of Minecraft, bits of lots of other stuff, like survival stuff, it really is a thing people like new broken versions of.
Yes, yeah. The excitement, novelty factor of like, what can I do in this one that's different, I feel is very strong with these games, and it is weird. Like, you're right. I think it's not a case of where early access just happens to work for something. It's a case of where early access is better.
Yeah, which is really, really bizarre. And we need to keep an eye on this because, like, people are so excited about being able to do something they haven't been able to do before, and then people have now found the genre in which they want to be offered that option. So.
Yes, yeah. Number 9 is Payday 2, despite problems around microtransactions, as discussed earlier. Number 8 is Tales of Zestiria, which we mentioned last week, the kind of big RPG thing. It's really hanging around in there. These games tend to be in the top 10 for a week and then drop out, but it's at number 8, so obviously doing very well. Number 7 is Worms Collection, which is on sale. The worms just never go away. They are back in the top 10 of Steam. This is a weird top 10, but we'll keep going. Warhammer End Times Vermintide. I have no idea what that is, apart from the fact that it's got Warhammer in it. Is it DLC? Do you know what this is?
No, it's like I think it's a bit like Shadow of Mordor.
Oh, really? Really? Okay.
You can tell that our like regular show producer Jimmer is off today.
We don't know
because our irregular person Paul Taylor is doing it and doesn't put things like Steam sales and pre-release in brackets.
I can't be bothered with that.
But yeah. I think Vermintide, and I'm really sorry, I'm not on board with that name at all. I think that's a pre-order, and I'm fairly sure that Payday 2 is on a 75% off sale as well.
Oh, that's right. But I mean, everyone knows that's why it's going to be in the top 10. It's not going to have a sudden spurt of excitement, is it? Vermintide Together to the End. Like, they just keep adding subtitles to this thing. I can't tell what it is from their website, and frankly, you know what, I don't care. CSGO is number 5, GTA 5 is number 4, Rocket League Back to the Future Car Pack is number 3, as to cement how stupid this week is. Fallout 4 is number 2, but at number 1, and this is quite rare for an indie game to come in at number 1, it's Rebel Galaxy. Now, Rebel Galaxy is a kind of 4X game that's made by the developers of Torchlight. And that, to me, seems to be the only reason why this would be at number 1, because people cannot get enough of this genre. And the Torchlight devs just have this massive, mega community who seem to have followed them into a different genre, perhaps going against what we talked about earlier. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I hadn't paid much attention to this, actually. But yeah, I guess I need to now. This looks like Sins of a Solar Empire to me, but apparently it's not like that. But we'll give you a full report next week.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to track this down and possibly play it. Although I didn't really get on with Torchlight, but I'll have a look.
The fact that this has really come in, like totally out of everyone's radar. I don't even know if it was in early access. It's not at the moment. It's a full release. It's really interesting, and they've just kind of sneaked this one out. I've seen some reviews of it. They're not really all that positive. The Eurogamer one certainly wasn't. The fans seem to like it. It's got very positive reviews on Steam. But yeah, a bit of a surprise. I think there are these indie devs out there wielding this massive power that we sort of don't know about, and then they release something, and it goes in at number 1. Truly astonishing. Now, I don't believe we have any listener questions this week. So
that's sad.
It is sad. We'll just take a little bit of a brief pause before we go into the television and film lounge area. Now, there is something I'd like to talk about in the television and film lounge area, and that is Mr. Robot, because both you and I are watching that, and I feel like it got a load of attention initially, and then because we're late to everything, that's slightly died down now. I definitely think it's worth watching. It's a combination of sort of slightly interesting narrative stuff, some really good action, some quite funny dialogue, and some technical stuff that isn't completely terrible, I would say.
Yeah, I really like it. It really reminds me of Homeland Series 1 a lot, despite not being massively in the same genre. It has a really similar feel to me. It's got like it's very sped up. Lots of things which most shows would take 4 or 5 episodes to happen tend to happen in one episode here. I think the first episode is great. I'm not really sold on the second, third, and fourth, but the 5th, 6th, and 7th are very, very good, and I've heard good stuff about the end of the series. I think we should watch it. I mean, it doesn't really sort of qualify as cult to me because it's a bit too mainstream for that, actually, even though it's got lots of things which look cult.
Yeah.
This kind of hacker stuff is big enough to not just be cult now. I really like a lot of things about it. I think that there's some really great writing in the last couple of episodes, some really like properly good dialogue between characters, which I really bought into. There's some. I think it's really matured in the middle of the series, and I'm into it.
So every show, it's very focused on the main character initially. It has his interior monologue, and every show has to go through this period where it needs to stop using the main character as a crutch. And I feel like Mr. Robot does that a little bit slowly, but it eventually finds its feet with that quite well. So there are these secondary characters who are quite boring in the first couple of episodes and seem a bit one-dimensional, but then it really does take the time to flesh them out, to give them different sides. There's one character who starts off in the first episode as just kind of being this sort of absolute waste of space, and then she kind of develops into like quite a nuanced character who you get sympathy for, and that's very, very difficult to do. It's very skillful show arc manipulation to manage to do that with quite a minor character who doesn't get a lot of screen time. So it's very sophisticated on a lot of levels, and it's got Christian Slater in it, which is just totally weird, and he's quite bad, but it doesn't undermine it at all.
Yeah, I was completely on board with what you said about it being a bit disappointing that he's not better.
Yes.
Because I think he could have just maybe toned it down slightly, and it would have been good.
Or toned it up slightly. You know, like I feel like his character is. So, for, if you haven't seen the show, he's just this enigmatic character that appears kind of fairly early on, and it sort of draws the main character into this underground world. And he's supposed to be this kind of crackpot. Basically, that's kind of referenced a few times. He's supposed to be quite extreme, but he just seems a bit like a drunk guy in a bar, really. He just kind of looks like someone who used to be in the army and would kind of ramble at you about that. He doesn't have any. There's no kind of big weirdness to him.
Yeah, I'm going to wait until I finish the series to kind of decide exactly what I think about him, because I'm unclear right now whether there are a few, shall we say, unannounced reasons why his character can't be a certain way.
Sure, yeah.
But I basically agree that it's a bit disappointing, and I'm a Slater fan. I'm a big Broken Arrow fan. I basically really like. I basically almost love this show. I really wish episode 3 and 4 hadn't been quite so boring, because outside of that, I'm really like a pretty huge fan.
Yeah, I actually quite liked episode 3 and 4.
Okay.
I mean, episode 4 has a very great scene in it that I particularly like. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. It's just a scene where the main character's talking to someone else, and it does something slightly unusual with him. The interplay of his interior monologue and what he's doing are quite interesting. And then there's also a drug trip episode, which is just not something that you like
No.
de facto for some reason, and I just found hilarious. So yes, Mr. Robot, do watch it. It's got very good music as well. Really, really good music for a TV show.
Great music.
Yes, we do recommend that. Right, that's enough of that, unless you have anything else you would like to talk about at this point.
I have nothing else to say.
Then in that case, goodbye, and we will see you next week.
Goodbye, everyone.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.